So in this video, we're going to take a look into the Sustainable Development Goals and look at how each goal is composed of a series of targets and actions, and we'll look at how we track those, how we can investigate them, and how we can see how we're doing working towards that goal. So we'll be looking at the internal structure of each of the Sustainable Development Goals, and this will provide you with an insight on how each of the goals can be broken down into much smaller targets and actions and aims for us to reach. Each of these goals is such a vast target to aim for. It can be a bit daunting to think about how we can start to approach these goals in an actionable method. And that's something else that's come from our history of the goals as well, that some of the previous attempts didn't have these smaller goals, targets and structures built into them, which made it much harder to track and aim towards progress for them. The first thing we can do for each of the goals is to break them down into a series of targets. And these are smaller, quantifiable steps that must be reached to achieve the overarching goal. So each of these has a data set or a number or something we can track and aim towards, track towards our progress towards the goal. And each of these targets are then split into different outcome targets that are smaller goals that need to be reached, and methods, so how we can start to implement change to bring about the goal. And as an example, in this sprint, we'll look at goal 2, zero hunger, as an example of this. But you're encouraged to go away and look through some of the goals yourselves and look through the different targets and actions through each of them. And you might want to think about what we talked about in the first sprint in this series. Maybe pick a goal that resonates with you and have a look at the individual targets and actions that go into that goal. So instead, we're going to look at goal 2, zero hunger, as a case study to look through how these goals are structured. The first thing we have are our outcome targets. And these outcome targets summarize the goal that we're working towards into a series of smaller achievements. So we know our zero hunger goal is to end world hunger by 2030, but what are the steps that we need to take towards that? So our first target is 2.1, and that's by 2030 to end hunger and ensure access by all people, in particular the poor and people in vulnerable situations, including infants, to safe, nutritious and sufficient food all year round. 2.2, by 2030, end all forms of malnutrition, including achieving by 2025 the internationally agreed targets on stunting and wasting in children under 5 years of age, and address the nutritional needs of adolescent girls, pregnant and lactating women and older persons. By 2030, double the agricultural productivity and incomes of small-scale food producers, in particular women, indigenous people, family farmers, pastoralists and fishers, including through secure and equal access to land, other productive resources and inputs, knowledge, financial services, markets and opportunities for value addition and non-farm employment. 2.4, by 2030, ensure sustainable food production systems and implement resilient agricultural practices that increase productivity and production, that help maintain ecosystems, that strengthen capacity for adaptation to climate change, extreme weather, drought, flooding, and other disasters, and that progressively improve land and soil quality. By 2020, maintain the genetic diversity of seeds, cultivated plants, farmed and domesticated animals, and their related wild species, including through soundly managed and diversified seed and plant banks at the national, regional, and international levels, and to promote the access to and fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the utilisation of genetic resources and associated traditional knowledge as internationally agreed. So they do get a bit wordy and a bit more complicated when we get down to these individual targets, but they provide us with specific goals that we need to reach before we reach the larger, broader scale sustainable development goal. So what that is it's a way to break the goal down into where we need to target action, who we need to target action is, and what some of the challenges are to reaching that. So it's identifying particular areas that this goal needs to target. So that's our outcome target. So the next set of targets are our implementation targets. And these are methods we need to implement to reach our goals within the desired time frame. So you can see the first set of goals were things we needed to reach, and this set of implementation targets are goals that we need, of things that we need to do. So it's quite a subtle difference, but quite important when we're looking at how the sustainable development goals can be reached. So our first implementation target, 2A, is to increase investment, including through enhanced international cooperation in rural infrastructure, agricultural research, and extension services, technology, development, and plant and livestock gene banks in order to enhance agricultural productive capacity in developing countries, in particular least developed countries. So you can kind of see how our implementation target links to our outcome target there. So it's providing a method of how we get to those targets that we set on the last slide. To be correct and prevent trade restrictions and distortions in world agricultural markets, including through the parallel and elimination of all forms of agricultural export subsidies and all export measures with equivalent effect in accordance with the mandate of the Doha Development Round. And finally, target 2C, to adopt measures to ensure the proper functioning of food commodity markets and their derivatives and facilitate timely access to markets information, including on food reserves, in order to help limit extreme price volatility. So you can see how those two different types of goals really break down our broad goal of ending hunger into a series of kind of implementationable and actionable targets that we can work towards. So then we can break our goals down even further. For each of those individual targets, we have a series of indicators, so waypoints on the way to achieving the SDG that tell us how we're doing. And these are concise, quantifiable values or data sets that can be monitored and tracked. So for our target 2.2 to by 2030 end all forms of malnutrition, we have two indicators. And these are things that we can go out and measure, and we can see how we're doing and track them as we progress towards the goal. So our first indicator of 2.2 is 2.21, is a prevalence of stunting, height for age of 2 standard deviations from the median of the World Health Organization child growth standards among children under 5 years, and 2.2, the prevalence of malnutrition, weight for height, 2 standard deviations from the median of the World Health Organization child growth standards among children under 5 years by age or type. So now we're down to the point where we've got a number that we can measure, and we can study that number, and we can see how it's doing and it's progressing, whether that's a positive change or a negative change. So this gives us a method to really track our goals and provide a number that we can see how we're doing as we progress towards the overall SDG. So we can see how we work down from a very broad goal of ending world hunger to a specific thing that we can go out and measure and track. And each of the goals and each of the targets has these indicators. So this is what some of the data looks like when we start drilling down into that to track these goals. So this is what progress towards the goals or progress away from the goals actually looks like when we get the data. So we're looking at the indicators for goal 2 and target 2.2. So on the left, we have the number proportion of undernourished people, 2000 to 2002, 2014, 2016. So you can see generally we've made progress and reducing the number and percentage of malnourished people within the world from 2002 to 2016. So we can also see where our areas that need tackling are as well, which areas have the largest proportion of undernourished people as well. So we can start to see if we want to take action, where and when and how we can start to implement that action. So on the right, we have our proportion of children under 5 with stunted growth, which is the other indicator that we looked at. And again, we can see how that compares between 2000 and 2014. So again, we've made positive progress in reducing those percentages kind of everywhere. We can actually see in some places we haven't made progress. In Oceania, we're going up 1% of the proportion of children. So another way we can look at this is look at the Sustainable Development Report, which we can find as an interactive map online. And this shows us how each country that we've got data for is doing towards the goal. And that's from green to red, from the SDG achieved to major challenges remain. And this is the map for the whole of SDG 2 of Zero Hunger. And you can see it's not the most positive map. We've got a lot of places where major challenges remain, and the rest are mainly places where significant challenges remain. And you might wonder why we have some of our more developed countries with significant challenges to remain. And when we can think about that is we can look at all of our indicators for this SDG. We've got prevalence of undernourishment, prevalence of stunting, prevalence of wasting, prevalence of obesity, human trophic level. That is telling us how efficient our diets are, so generally how such as how much meat is being consumed, as opposed to other more sustainable, efficient food choices, our cereal yield, our sustainable nitrogen management, and our exports of hazardous pesticides. So we can see when we say zero hunger, not everything relates to the physical amount of food that is available to people in these countries. It relates to that more complicated web of things that we talked about. Because we talked about not only do we want enough food for people, but we want all that food to be produced in a sustainable and ethical way. So if we're producing and exporting hazardous pesticides, that's not sustainable. So we might have a country that is producing enough food, but it's still exporting hazardous pesticides, which is not a sustainable action. And so we can click on countries. So if we click on the United Kingdom, we can have a look at how it's doing on all those different indicators. And that can tell us why we haven't achieved the SDG. So we can see in the UK, prevalence of undernourishment, we've reached that goal, stunting, prevalence of wasting, and cereal yield. So we've got some progress towards the goal, as we'd expect. We do have some hunger in the UK, obviously, but it's a fairly low proportion compared to other countries. But we can see other goals that we haven't reached. Our prevalence of obesity, we've got significant challenges to remain. The human trophic level, so we need to change our diets. We're consuming too much meat and inefficient food, and we're also red for exporting hazardous pesticides. So then if we're interested in each of these goals, so where we can click on the indicators, and they'll take us to a map of those different SDGs on the global scale. So if we clicked on the prevalence of undernourishment, we can see in green that is a bit more positive. We've achieved that goal in quite a few countries, but we still have some countries where significant challenges remain. And on the left, we have our plot here, so we can click through and we can see how that's going in different countries. So you can see Ethiopia there is making quite good progress, decreasing that progress towards the goal, but still not quite sufficient to reach the goal. We can see that here. So the aim of this is just to demonstrate this resource is really powerful and a really good way to break down where the goals are and where challenges remain. And we can also pick out some interesting global trends as well. If instead of looking at it by country, we go back to some of our indicators. So this is our prevalence of undernourishment. So we can see areas in green that have reached the goals and areas where significant challenges remain. And we can compare that to our human trophic level. So how energy intensive is our diet and how efficient is our diet. So we can see kind of in the developed world, in Europe and North America, we've got significant challenges remain. Our diets are very inefficient. We're eating too much meat produce. And we can see actually some of the countries where challenges remain for malnutrition also have more energy efficient levels. So that's telling us the countries that have enough food almost have too much food and are eating too many meat products, and countries that don't have enough food are eating more efficient diets. So this is a very powerful tool, as I've said, and you'll find the link on the sprint. So it's worth going away and exploring this yourself as well when you're looking at some of your SDGs that you're interested in. You might want to see how different countries are doing and how it breaks down into these different targets and actions. So the final part of each goal is actions. So these are things that we can do to progress towards those goals. So some of those areas where challenges remain, some of these actions can help start moving towards them. So a direct one that is fairly obvious for zero hunger is wasting less food and supporting local farmers. And that means we're lowering the carbon footprint of our food source. We're more efficient using the food that we produce. And we can see if we reduced food waste, we'd have enough food to start reducing those countries that didn't have enough nutrition available to them. And also by supporting local farmers, we're discouraging export of food, which is an issue. It's one of those targets we talked about, that food is often produced in countries that have malnutrition and then can be transported away from those countries. So we really want to end that as well. We can make sure food is being produced locally for the people that need it. So we have some other targets as well from the UN website. So we mentioned cutting food waste, eating healthier meals. As we remember, efficiency of our diets and obesity is part of our SDG as well. We want to tackle those things as well as malnutrition. So changing our diets can do that. Buy local and seasonal food, that can make our diets more efficient, and that might not directly help goal 2 the most, but we'll think we're impacting our other goals from our climate action, our sustainable consumption and production. So again, another demonstration of how the goals are linked. And I think the last one here, learn about food systems, is something I think is really important. Is just think about whenever you buy or consume something, think about where it's come from, how it's been produced, and understanding all those different impacts that go into that, and that can help inform our food choices. So as with all the goals, just educating yourself a bit is a really powerful way to start seeing how we can take action and advance towards progress towards the goals. So just one last quick example. When we're looking at how we can directly get involved, we've got plenty of organisations locally, if you want to help on the local level, things like FareShare that help in fighting hunger and tackling food waste in Greater Manchester. I have their website link here. So just a way to show how you can directly get involved in your local community. So just to summarise, each of our SDGs can be broken down into a series of targets. Each of these targets has a trackable indicator, so some number or data set or something we can go out and measure and track and see how progress towards the goal is going, whether it's positive or negative, or whether we're on track to meet that target. And this is where these are really key to understand all the targets and indicators, because they really tell you how we can take action, and we can track those and we can see where action's not been taken, or we can find positive case studies, we can see where action has helped. So we said at the end of the last sprint, you should take some time now to go away and explore maybe one or two of the SDGs, read through the targets and actions, have a look at the SDG report and see how those are going. And then maybe think of one area or one action that you can take to help contribute towards a sustainable development goal.